Hey everyone, welcome to M2F Story. Today I am going to share with you Being Girl for the Summer Part 3, written by Amanda Walker. Françoise and Philippe were French students on a touring holiday in England. Their English was not perfect, but they could make themselves understood, and it was clear that they were very happy to be sat with two pretty girls. There was no pressure. They just wanted some company, and the four chatted and shared their meal. The girls reveled in the attention of the two handsome Frenchmen. Eventually, the girls said they had to leave, and the boys jumped up to help them clear up and to give them a farewell kiss. Susan had never been kissed by a boy before, but it happened before she had time to react, and it wasn't unpleasant. She did prefer kissing Karen, though. The boys were staying in Hawkshead, and they set off over Clafe Heights, waving back to the girls as they climbed the hill. The girls returned to Windermere via the ferry and up the hill through Bowness. They collected their purchases and met Susan's aunt at the library. As they drew up at Karen's aunt's house, she asked Susan to go in and have a coffee. Susan's aunt said all right and to get home in time for tea. "So you two are all right again," said Karen's aunt. "Yes, thank you," said Susan. "It was just a misunderstanding." "Well, I'm very pleased to hear it. You are both lovely girls," she replied. After their drink, they went up to Karen's room and separated her purchases. She was so excited she decided to try on the leotard and tights immediately and shed all her clothing straight away. Susan was a bit taken aback by the sight of her naked friend, but feigned shyness and agreed to change in another room. When Susan returned, they could see and admire each other's choice. There is something about the shiny lycra that sets off a fit young body. They were both quite beautiful, and they were drawn to each other again. The thin cloth heightened the feeling as they embraced and entwined their young bodies until they were called down, as it was time for tea. Susan now felt that she could not tell Karen about the deception. She seemed to have overcome her inhibitions about kissing a girl, and they were now great friends. Susan would still prefer not to have to deceive her and to have a boy-girl relationship, but she was now comfortable with the situation. The next day, they had an appointment in the morning to meet the vicar about the Victorian fair. "I'm so glad you two young ladies offered to help," said Rev Green. "There are so few young people in this community. Mrs. Green has obtained 2 original-made uniforms, and I wondered whether you would consent to wearing them and serving afternoon tea at the event." Karen said immediately, "Of course we would be happy to." Susan was amused by the idea, and as Karen seemed so keen, went along with it. They made a note of the times they would be required, then went upstairs to meet Mrs. Green and try on her outfits. The dresses were original full-length maid's uniforms and had been handed down through her family from her grandmother. She had everything including period underwear and corsets. "I think you have to go the whole hog or they just won't look right. It's years since I wore these with my sister for a similar event. You'll find it interesting. Is that okay?" Soon they were stood in the petticoats and pantaloon knickers, and Mrs. Green was fitting the corsets to them. After measuring, they realized they would need to them to fit the narrow waist style of yesteryear. The first pull on the corset threads was the worst. After that, they both got down to a low 20s waistline and prepared to try on the dresses. Firstly, though, they pulled on black stockings and then ankle boots with tiny buttons up the side. The corsets meant they couldn't bend properly, and Mrs. Green showed them how to use a little hooked tool for the buttons. Finally, the black dresses that fitted perfectly to their corseted bodies. Lots of buttons, no zips, and then a long white apron, and to finish a lace-trimmed mop cap. They looked at each other in delight. Mrs. Green also smiled broadly. "There we are, a perfect fit. Just see that you can move about easily. Take care with the stairs, lift your skirts up." They went into Rev Green's office. "Oh, perfect, just perfect. It's a long time since you've had those out, Sylvia. Ladies, thank you, this will be perfect. Come out into the garden, I'll get my camera. Sylvia will make us some drinks, please, dear." "I think he's happy," whispered Karen. "Perfectly happy," replied Susan. He took photos on the front step to the Victorian rectory. "I'll use these for my posters," he said. Then they sat in the garden for a coffee, Susan and Karen noticing how the corset forced them to sit very straight and their other movements were restricted. After the drink, they changed back and felt the relief as the corsets were undone. They agreed when they would arrive before the fete. The day of the fete dawned and Karen came to collect Susan. They had decided that tracksuits would be the most suitable wear, and they were soon on their way. Their aunts were very pleased about their helping out and had promised to attend to see their girls' costumes. There was a bit of chair and table shifting to do once they got to the vicarage, so the tracksuits were a good idea. Finally, they were ready to get into their dresses and associated corsets, stockings, and of course those boots. They went carefully down the stairs and presented themselves ready for work. The event started at 10:30 and people gradually began to arrive. The girls were complimented on their appearance and began serving drinks to people on the lawn. They were surprised at the attention they received. Many of the older ladies were reminiscing about their days in service and how the youth of today wouldn't stand for such things. Their aunts arrived and were very complimentary about their uniforms and stood proudly admiring the girls and pointing them out to their friends. The vicar had swings and a roundabout at the end of his garden, and the smallest children were playing there while the adults enjoyed the stalls selling homemade cakes and sewn and knitted items. The girls had been on their feet for 2 hours and were beginning to get stiff from the unfamiliar clothes, especially the boots. "These clothes, how did ladies stand them?" asked Karen. "I know, I'm constantly short of breath and I feel like I'm in a cage," replied Susan, although she didn't mention that she was still getting used to wearing conventional female wear. "I can see you are a bit tired, ladies. Take a 5-minute break." "I'll cover for you," said the vicar's wife. So they sat down at the end of the garden and watched the children play. "You look absolutely gorgeous today," said Karen. "Not looking so bad yourself." Susan smiled as she replied, "I'd love to give you a big kiss right now, but I don't think it's the done thing between serving wenches." "No, I think the master and mistress would chain you to the range and whip you to save your soul," replied Karen. "Ooh, what a delicious thought. Perhaps we can try that later. Where are your Victorian values, my girl? I think it's you that needs the scolding." The vicar came down to see them with a large, happy-looking gentleman in tow. They had stood up and curtsied before they realized what they were doing. "How lovely you two are getting into the part, aren't you? May I introduce Mr. Greatorex? He owns Winster House just up the valley from here." Again they curtsied, smiling, giggling at the way they were behaving. He took each of their hands and kissed them in a very gallant manner. "Such charming young ladies," he said. "Mr. Greatorex is having his own party this week and was wondering if you two would be free this Friday to wait on while wearing these uniforms. My wife has agreed to loan them. You will be well paid, and I'm told a donation to the church funds will be forthcoming. I'll leave you to think about it. Let us know later." With that, the two men left to talk to some of the other guests. "Well, what do you think?" asked Karen. "I'm not sure. I don't know this man. I presume the vicar thinks he's okay, so that's good. Oh, yes, the family are well known around here. Stinking rich, and he has 2 gorgeous sons. I'm prepared to share them with you." Susan thought for a moment and felt a little sad. Her friend couldn't see her as the boy who loved her, and she couldn't bring herself to tell her the truth. She felt she would lose her if she did. "Susan, what's wrong?" "Oh, nothing. Yes, let's do it. It will be fun." "I'm sorry. Did you think I would prefer the boys to you? You are still my most special friend, but I do still like boys. We both do. Remember the French boys? Is that okay?" "Yes, fine," replied Susan. It wasn't fine at all. How could she resolve this situation? They had had their 5 minutes, and as they stood to return to work, there was some agitation in the crowd. "Has anyone seen my little boy?" cried one of the ladies. "He's only 3. I can't find him anywhere." Just as Susan saw the boy who had climbed over a stile at the end of the garden and was on the road. "I'll get him, don't worry," she called as she hitched up her skirts and ran as fast as she could in this get-up. She reached the road and started to catch up with the toddler, who was laughing happily at the game of chase. Only as she picked up the excited child did she see the van coming around the corner. Susan screamed, then everything went black. John awoke as the bright light shone in her eyes. "Good morning, John. How are you feeling?" He slowly opened his eyes. He felt awful, his body felt numb, and he had a splitting headache. At first, being called John didn't register. He had allowed the Susan persona to take over. The doctor was shining the torchlight into his eyes. "You had quite a bump yesterday. You are mildly concussed, and your right leg is broken. Take your time. How is the little boy?" "He's fine, thanks to you. Not even a scratch. You were still holding him even though you were unconscious." "Who knows about, that I'm not Susan?" "Your aunt came with you in the ambulance and explained everything. I know, and your nurse knows, but that's it. I can't pretend to understand what you were doing dressed like that. I never use a corset myself. What? You're not the only one to enjoy a bit of femininity. Oh, right, thanks. Now that's settled, I'm sorry I didn't introduce myself. I'm Dr. Keith, and you have a big problem. What's that? Well, are you Susan the heroine or John the boy who dresses up in girls' clothes so well his girlfriend doesn't even know? Why worry? Well, you have some very grateful parents of a small child just itching to thank you, a girlfriend desperate to have you better, the parish priest saying prayers for you, and your aunt who has spent 2 days with you, to say nothing of the gentlemen of the press. Yes, I think we will have to rapidly ensure that you are Susan until all this blows over. I can control the medical staff who will attend you. Your injuries are recoverable with rest. I think you will be back to normal in about 4 or 5 weeks. Is my aunt here? She's on her way. I sent her home to get some rest. She will bring all the attachments you had used to create Susan. We had to remove everything to check you over. Very convincing, I must say. I'm tired now and I've got a belting headache. That's okay. Take these tablets and sleep. He awoke later, or did he? He could hear voices, his aunt for definite. Was that Karen as well? He was sure he could feel hands moving his body. He felt a kiss, then a more passionate one. Then the mists closed and he fell unconscious again. The next morning he awoke. A slow, groggy awareness came to him. As he moved, he realized his attachments had been restored, and he was now Susan again. Later after breakfast, his aunt and Karen came to visit. They didn't stay long. The doctors had further tests to do. As they left, Karen called, "See you soon, Susan. Love you." The emphasis on the name alarmed him. She knew. He was sure she knew. Susan awoke again in the hospital and realized that the weight was back on her chest and matters were tucked away down below. Then she remembered the gentlemen of the press were coming today. As she began to stir, she heard her aunt's voice. "Hello, sleepyhead. Let me rinse your face and then we'll get some war paint on you so you look good in the photos." Then Susan noticed that Karen was sat at the foot of the bed. Immediately, Susan burst into tears and she came to comfort her friend. "How can you be here? I'm a liar, cheat, and deceiver. And I love you however you appear. But, shh, your aunt had to tell me when we went in the ambulance to the hospital. Just in case there were any complications, you were very poorly. I was so shocked by the accident that another surprise like that didn't really hit home until afterwards. I was angry. I was very intrigued. I knew that the love we have wouldn't go away. You never hurt me, you were my friend, and I enjoyed our time together. I'm glad you still can bear to see me. I felt so ashamed by the deception, it just sort of happened. I even tried to tell you once. I realized that now when I sat down with your aunt and discussed, I realized certain things were said, and now see the significance." She explained how what started as a bit of fun on her and your part got out of hand. "Do you think that you as a boy would have come to church and have done all the other things we shared? I doubt it. There you go. I probably wouldn't have met my best friend in the whole world. Neither would I. Right now to business. Here's what will happen today. The Fosters, whose baby you saved, will be here in an hour. The press will be in half an hour later. They will do a quick interview. If it gets too personal, then come over all tired and we'll send them away. Will you be here? Yes, your aunt and I will stay with you, don't worry. I've met the Fosters, they are lovely people and are so grateful. You did save their son's life, there's no doubt about that. I'm frightened by all this attention. I understand, but if we do this, it will be finished. Your aunt and I have created a history for you so it won't get back to people you know. You will make a full recovery before you return to your parents, so don't worry. Now you lie back and let us doll you up, said her aunt. The Fosters were, as Karen said, lovely people and had brought their son to see Susan. The poor mite had a few cuts and bruises, but seemed unaware and had to be restrained from jumping on Susan. They chatted, and after saying thank you for the umpteenth time, had a request to make. Johnny is being christened this autumn. We would be honored if you and Karen would consent to be his godmothers. We can't think of a better couple to look after him. Susan was quite stunned and looked at Karen. She shrugged her shoulders. This was the first she had heard of this. We're very privileged to be asked, said Karen. I'm sure Susan will have recovered by the autumn. Thank you very much. That's it for today. Hope you have enjoyed it. If you do, then be sure to subscribe for the next part of this story.